Hi, everybody, and welcome to a special one-on-one edition of Newsmakers. I'm Jerry Roberts. It is Friday, April 25th, and today we'll be discussing a subject of interest to everyone, and that is the economy. And I'm delighted and honored to welcome as my guest for that conversation Dr. Peter Rupert, professor of economics at UCSB. Peter is executive director of the UCSB Economic Forecast and associate director of the Laboratory for Aggregate Economics and Finance. He is a graduate of Santa Clara University, earned his doctorate from the University of Rochester, and besides UCSB, has taught at USC, the University of London, among other colleges, and has also served at the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland. He's written scores of scholarly articles, also blogs regularly about the current economic environment at economicssnapshot.com. And top tags on his Rate Your Professor page are Tough Grader, Get Ready to Read, and Skip Class You Won't Pass. Perhaps most importantly, he is a San Francisco Giants fan and earned my everlasting envy by having had the opportunity as a child to play catch with Willie Mays. Peter Rupert, welcome to Newsmakers. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Jerry, thanks so much for the kind introduction and happy to be here. I love your show.
Hey, so we both know presidents famously get blamed for bad economies and love to take credit for good ones, and it's always debatable about how much impact they actually have. But before we get into talking about Donald Trump and tariffs and so on, let me level set by asking you, what was the economy like the day before the election in last November, and where is it now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the day before the election, the economy was actually, growing gangbusters. It was doing great. The labor market was as solid as ever. The unemployment rate is pretty much as low as it's been since the 1950s. GDP growth was strong. As you know, the stock market was setting records daily, and the hopes were high. And I think that you know, back to what you said before that, presidents take, the blame or the credit for things that they do. And I one time wrote this little piece that what I said was, let's look at the first 4 years after the inauguration of a president, and let's look at the employment growth in the first 4 years. And I asked people, just tell me who the had the largest growth, since the 1950s. And people, here's the beauty, right? They choose their favorite president, right? It turns out it was Jimmy Carter. And
Really?
well, it just so happened he got in when the economy was doing really, really well. You know, he did nothing right to say with it in the first. So anyway, so those kind of things are kind of crazy. But what I like to explain to people is if you go back to 1929 and you look at our real GDP growth, that is getting rid of inflation, it grows about 2% a year, something like that on average, which means we get 2% wealthier. But then what I say is you draw a straight line through that, and it's an amazingly straight line. And I say, okay, call out your favorite president or your least favorite president. They don't show up. What shows up is the Great Depression and World War II. Those are the only big blips around
Hmm.
that. And we all know what happened during the Great Depression. And, so things didn't work out so well for lots of reasons, but everything else is just a small blip. And the economy is super strong typically, and we get through most of these things.
And where are we today? About the same place?
Well, I mean, like I said, we were, if you look at, you just sent me this recent article from the LA Times, what the IMF had said, and they have downgraded growth. There's no doubt about that. Growth is going to slow down if these
In the
tariffs hold
US
up.
and around the world.
The US and around the world. Um, the US, they had forecast, the US would grow something like 2.5 to 2.7%, which is very strong growth. And now it's downgraded to like 1.8%. That's not recession territory, but it's certainly we're certainly going to slow down. And if the tariffs stay at the levels they are now, I'm betting we'll go into a recession for sure.
So, blips aside, the one big event has been these tariffs. Is
Yes.
that correct? I mean, I'm not saying it's the
Yes.
Depression or World War II, but that's been the biggest event. And talk about, if you would, just to explain, pretend I know nothing about macroeconomics or
Yeah.
why are the tariffs having this effect? I don't know when I say the tariffs, I don't know whether it's putting them on, increasing them, taking them off, changing it day to day. It's been a
Right.
very uncertain
Right. Well, the
thing.
daily day roller coaster, that's very upsetting. And, that's almost criminal. I mean, that's just, people can't
I
plan.
mean,
They don't know
the changing, the whipsaw.
the changing. Yeah. I mean, so, so, so let me use a technical term if that's okay. The whole
Please.
thing's a shit show. And listen, in order to understand tariffs, I mean, most people who don't really, as economists or something, if you don't really understand what tariffs are and what they do, um, all you hear is the word tariff, and you have to think it's good, bad, and people have different views on it. But so we've had international trade forever, and the reason we have international trade is that we're good at some things and not good at other things, and that can change over time. And so when you think about it, um, um, so if I ask you, do you make your own shoes?
No.
Why not?
I just don't have the time
You don't have the time. So
or
how
the
about
leather or the
or the leather or
expertise
the
or any,
expertise?
yeah.
Do you make your own pencils? Do you make
Right.
your no? So, so the way it works is you find out what you're good at and you do that and you take these things we call dollars and you trade them for things that you want that you're not good at producing. And that happens at the personal level. It happens at a state level. It happens at the global level. And so it makes us all richer. That's the point. Being able to trade. So, for example, we should not be growing rice in California, right? It should be grown in swampland, which we don't have much of. And if you think about it that way, so what we should be doing is, growing avocados and exporting them to someone who wants avocados, and we import rice because we would get rice cheaper, they would get avocados cheaper. So
Hmm.
it's not a zero-sum game, which when you hear the word tariffs and the words around it, people make it seem like it's a zero-sum game. Like China has been taking our jobs away from us. And China has taken some jobs in some industries away from us, but technology also takes jobs away from us. Back in 1900, 40 to 50% of the population was in agriculture, employed in agriculture. Now it's 1%. So would we want to go back and say, hey, let's get back to farming? I mean, the answer is no. I mean, we're really good at farming now. Productivity is great. And so when we say they're taking jobs away, that means jobs are being reallocated. If you went back to 1900 and you asked farmers, in 100 years, only 1% of the population is going to be in agriculture, they're like, well, what will people do?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, so that's one way to think about it.
So when you look at the tariff policy, if it is in fact a policy, the assumption that, as I understand it, is if we are importing more to a country than we are exporting, there is something inherently unfair there, a so-called trade imbalance, and
Mhm.
that's hurting our economy. And if we make all of those equal, then we will not only not be getting ripped off, which I think is the psychological thing going on
Right.
here, but also we'll know endless riches for our government. We'll have all this taxes. What is wrong with the case that Trump makes on tariffs?
Well, the idea that tariffs are going to bring back jobs is just a fool's errand to begin with. He put 25% tariffs on steel in 2018. That didn't change the number of workers very much in the steel industry, hardly at all. It blipped up for a second and then went right back down. And, so if you think about the way they set it up, you know, is ludicrous. So let me explain why. So um, what they did was they said, okay, let's look at every country's trade imbalance, as you called it, where you know, um, we're importing more from them than they're importing from us. Let's look at that trade imbalance and then make our tariffs such that those things go to zero, right? That's what his idea was. So now I'm going to ask you another question. What's your trade imbalance with Vons, with the supermarket? What is it?
It's bad.
It's
It's really
bad.
bad.
When was the last time Vons bought something from you?
Well, it was my those shoes I made.
Yeah, right, right. So if you look at bilateral trade, that's silly to start with. So,
Yeah,
right? And it's the same idea. It's the same idea. There's many countries where, we're buying things from them and they're not ready to buy stuff from us. That's fine. So the other problem is the way that this was set up originally, and it was just and the way it got set up is something called a current account. That has to do with international finance and international trade. So the current account is is trade in goods. So back in the 40s and 50s, we were much more of a manufacturing country than we are today. Today, we're a much more service economy. Services are not in that measure. So if
right,
you look at the trade surplus for manufactured goods, we have a deficit. But if you look at the trade surplus we have for services, we're in a surplus because
right.
countries are buying the stuff we're good at, which are providing services. And so, we're just not good at manufacturing in many types of products. You know, we
And
used to
that
make,
and that that is the goal, as I understand it, of this policy. I mean, my dad only went to the eighth grade. He worked in a factory, but we had a pretty good life. He was able to buy a house. All of our neighbors were blue collar guys. Those
yeah,
jobs are all gone now.
they're
This
gone.
is supposed to bring all those jobs back, but
Well,
there's a
right.
fallacy there somewhere.
There's a fallacy. The fallacy is so, one quick example. So if you look at the steel industry, if you look at the employment in the steel industry versus all of those goods that are made with steel, where steel is an intermediate good, employment in those industries where steel is a major component of what they make, the employment in those industries is 80 times higher than it is in the steel industry itself. So if what you're doing is putting tariff on steel to save some steel workers' jobs, you're hurting everybody else in the economy who's trying to buy things that are made of steel,
Like cars.
like cars, like compute, whatever it is that's being made with some steel product. We're being hurt more. And by the way, tariffs aren't new. We've had tariffs on almost every product in some form or another over the last 100 and so years, and they've fallen a lot, tariff rates. But the main idea is, that being able to do international trade makes us and our trading partners richer. And if you prevent that from happening, you're going to make us poorer. That's why that, you know, when we think we're going to bring back all these manufacturing jobs, um, we're going to have lower output, which means lower wealth and lower income than we would have had otherwise. And that's why we're seeing a lower growth rate forecast by many economists.
So there's the fundamental policy questions, issues, concerns. Then we talked a little bit about this, but I just want to go back to it for a minute. The uncertainty that is created by this kind of constantly changing application, threatened application, size here, this country, that country. What does that do to, I mean, in terms of business, how does the business think about that? And what does that mean for our growth?
Well, I think what it means is having that uncertainty means, should I buy a car now or should I wait? Should the firm build a new car now or wait? Should I invest in a new technology plant now or should I wait? And as long as you have this uncertainty, people are going to hold back and wait till there's some resolution of that. Because when you think about building a new plant or factory in the United States, which we can't even build the damn road in 30 years, as you know. Um, Building a plant in the US is going to take many, many years and, billions of dollars perhaps. And, to make that decision, you want to know what's going to happen in the future. Just like, if you were thinking of buying a house and your income is very unsure or your wealth is unsure, you're going to wait. Now, what does it mean to wait? It means you're not going to be consuming and investing as you would have, which is going to hurt our GDP.
One other piece of this I want to ask you about is like carve outs, because all of a sudden then there were, well, the little steel that goes into the apple, there's not going to be any tariff on that, and so on and so forth. It just seems that there's sort of an element of corruption to,
Sure.
or at least the opportunity for that. I
Yeah,
mean, does that make any sense at all as a
it
policy?
makes a lot of sense. I mean, you know, obviously, if I'm a firm, and producing some product, I'm going to want to go and lobby for, here's why our industry is important and why you need to protect our industry, just like everybody else. And so you start thinking about these carve outs, like, you protect some, you don't protect others. Um, you know, you will be hard to pressed, except for some one guy who Trump listens to. I won't say his name; he's just a complete idiot. But you'd be hard pressed to find an economist who thinks anything else than zero tariffs are good. You'd be
Just
hard pressed.
just parenthetically, when I was reporting in San Francisco in the 80s and 90s, there was this weird guy that used to talk his way sometimes past the security guard and come up to the newsroom, and then he'd start bearding different reporters desk by desk about trade and immigration. His name was Peter Navarro. He he also ran for office for a few times with spectacular lack of success. But
Yeah,
it is hard to believe that
it
that's
is. So,
but
one other thing about tariffs, which, you know, people may not know this, but we've had a very strong sugar lobby in the United States.
sure,
And
forever.
and we're basically paying twice the world price for sugar in the United States because of our protection. So what does that mean? Well, for most people, it means nothing. You go to the store, you buy a couple pounds of sugar, you have no idea how much it costs. It's not very expensive, but it's twice the world price. Well, okay. So for a family, maybe it doesn't matter too much. It comes out, it's like $10 a year more that we're paying than we should have paid. But you multiply that by the number of households in the US, it's something around $3 billion
Wow.
that we're spending on sugar that we didn't have to be spending on sugar.
Well, and if I own a bakery, I imagine that's
You
kind of
ima- right. But if you put them on cars, and all of a sudden instead of 50,000 you're paying 100,000 for a car, you would notice.
right. So sum it all up as a practical matter, Peter. What does this all mean? Are we going to have higher inflation, fewer jobs, a recession? I mean, where do you, as you look out from this, from today,
Yeah. I mean,
three
I think
months,
if
6 months?
we stick to the size of the tariffs that the administration is talking about, we're certainly going to have fewer jobs. The probability of recession is going to go up a lot. We're certainly going to be growing slower, which means we're going to be, less rich, and we're going to be suffering for quite some time while these tariffs are in effect.
And then I just want to kind of go global for a second. You mentioned this International Monetary Fund report. It's called The Global Economy Enters a New Era, which is a nice neutral way of saying things. But it said the global economic system under which most countries have operated for the last 80 years is being reset, ushering the world into a new era. Existing rules are challenged while new ones are yet to emerge. So as it's kind of a global economic matter. I mean, it's the price of sugar and the price of cars, sure, but beyond that, it's a big deal. What's
It's a
happening?
huge deal. It's a huge deal. Now, so you remember that Ferris Bueller's Day Off with Ben Stein and talking about, Smoot Hawley. Um, during the Great Depression, what happened was that, many we started going into a recession, and then many firms, were like, hey, we're competing globally with these firms, which means that we can't sell our goods, which means that, things are really bad here in the United States. So if you put tariffs on, we'll be able to sell our goods because, we're going to have less competition. The government also did a few other things. I mean, it basically got rid of a lot of the Sherman Antitrust Act, which allowed firms to monopolize and increase prices. So there's lots of things that happened during the Great Depression. The Fed screwed up like crazy. You can read Milton Friedman. The Fed screwed up like crazy. Um, if it weren't for the Fed and some other things, you know, Smoot-Hawley probably would have caused a recession, but not a Great Depression. So, shutting down world trade means everyone is poorer. That's the point. Everyone's going to be paying higher prices for things, and um, you know, it's just devastating, and it's going to be.
When you think about it, I mean, you're a rational person used to dealing with rational people, and economics is a science that assumes people act in their own best interest.
Mhm.
I mean, what do you make of this? Why is this happening?
I think you get sold on an idea that, you know, you can protect jobs, and other people have tried it in other ways. You can stop technology from happening. Technology replaces jobs a lot, and as you've probably seen now, you go into, well, not a guy like you, but a guy like me. I go into Taco Bell and I have to like order on a
Oh, I
kiosk.
go into Taco Bell. Oh, yeah.
You got to order on a kiosk
No,
now, and it's
I gotta take my grandkids with me to help.
yeah. But do you want this? Do you want that? No, I don't want that. How about this? Do you want no, I just want to order my one thing and get out of there. And they're now producing, robot baristas,
Right.
that are starting to happen. And by the way, Target now has a small robotic nail painter that you go into Target, and it takes 300 3D scans of your fingers, and then you just put your fingers into it and it paints your nails. $10 in 10 minutes, right? So technology is going to replace some jobs for sure. Do I know what jobs people are going to have to take? No, I don't. But technology has been happening all the time. We used to make typewriters.
Yeah. We used to
Anyway,
make newspapers too.
we used to make newspapers.
We used to say in the final day, we're in the buggy whip industry, boys.
Yep.
That's what happens.
And there
Um,
are, I mean, but again, when we think about that, do we want to be, better off in terms of income and wealth and things like that? If the answer is yes, then, we have to let these sort of natural phenomena, these inventions happen, and, we could have stopped certain things from happening, like, um, do we really want to have typewriters instead of computers? Do we really want to have paper newspapers instead of, for some people, of course, the printers, people that were selling newspapers. Um, but if you really think about what the mission is of a news organization, it's to get the news out there.
well, but the market was speaking. The people stopped buying it. I
Yes,
mean, people
yes,
stopped advertising.
yes, of
They
course.
found other ways of doing it. There was
And you
Craigslist.
look at
There
and
was
you look
all
at things like Uber. I mean, why didn't taxis do Uber? Why didn't they figure? They had no incentive. They were a monopoly. They had no
right.
incentive to innovate. They were protected
And they were politically protected, I think, in
and
many
politically
cases.
protected. And now you get Uber, and if you kind of say to yourself, what's our mission? You know, and the taxis used to be, our mission is to go to the airport, pick up a person, and take them to their house. No, Uber's mission, for example, or Lyft or any of these other companies, it's like we're gonna we're in the business of transporting things, whether it's people or food or items, it doesn't really matter. And we're gonna make it very easy to do that, you
You
know.
know, you've been so kind with your time, but I had a couple other things, but I just have to say I took one of my grandkids to the Giants game recently. We stayed in a hotel, and a robot delivered my coffee in the morning. I've lived too long, I think,
Wow, wow.
to see that.
That's crazy.
Hey, our fine governor, Prince Gavin, was prancing around as he is wont to do the other day, boasting about how California has become the fourth largest economy in the world. Every governor I've ever known has made some form of that boast. I've never understood it or what it means. How are we doing in California? Are we exempt from all this? Are we going to get in the middle of it? What's your take?
No, we're going to be, with reciprocal tariffs, we're going to be hurting a lot. There's no doubt, we're not getting out of it. We're not getting out of it. I mean, we're producing cars in California. Um, those steel prices are going to go up. And, we're going to feel the pinch. There's no doubt about it. And just, one comment on that, on the fourth largest, the problem with some of these ideas is how would we think about the counterfactual in the sense of could we have even grown bigger had we had certain policies in place that allowed us to grow bigger, right? So it's always important for people to figure out the counterfactual, like what could have happened instead of this.
Yeah, yeah. So, where are you in the in your cycle for the economic forecast? When will we see a new one of those? Talk a little bit about how that works and what that is exactly.
Yeah. So the forecast project, it was around way before I was. It was started back in 1981 with some faculty members, and it's had a few iterations. I've been doing it now for about 15 years or so. Um, we're mainly there to collect data. Uh, it's very easy to find national data. As you know, many people are, whether it's good data or bad data, are putting it out there. Local data is a little bit harder to get, so we're in that space. We want to provide local data to policymakers and businesses and households to get them to make, more informed decisions about what's happening in our local economy. Um, we do this one big event, which people know about, but more than that. That's coming up this May 12th,
Soon, yeah.
at the Granada Theater. We're going to have a trade expert he runs the Rochester Global Institute for International Trade.
Oh,
He's going to be talking, I'm not a real trade economist. He is. We're going to have a guy named Jim Bullard, who used to be at the Federal Reserve System. He was the president of the St. Louis Fed. He's now left, so he can be now pretty frank about what he has to say. Before they had a script. Now he can kind of talk off script, and he's going to talk about what he sees as the Fed predicament, through a central banker's eyes. And then we have Leo Hanian, who's a UCLA professor, who's going to be talking about how the state of California made the housing problem intractable.
oh, wow.
A bunch of good topics.
That's a really good lineup. Hey,
Should be
let me
fun.
ask you about the Fed. I meant to ask you this anyway, because that's another thing the president's been on about. He's kept threatening Mr. Powell and inventing not very clever nicknames for him and trying to, basically take control of the Fed, which,
Yeah.
has been independent. Now he's backed off, apparently, because he heard from some business guys. But hey, what effect does that have? And more importantly, why does it matter that the Fed is independent, that the Federal Reserve Bank is independent?
That's great. A great question. I mean, um, there is a reason out there why every international contract is in US dollars. No one has forced that regime. Every oil contract in the Arab countries selling to another country is in US dollars. The current US bond market, that has been what's called a safe asset in the world. And that's because, it's a guaranteed return. We've never defaulted on our debt, et cetera. So if you look at some other countries, let's say Turkey, for example, they have an authoritarian, pretty much president. He's fired four heads of the central bank in the last 5 or 6 years because they didn't do what he thought they should be doing. By the way, they did bring inflation down from 100%. It's now only 60%. So they did bring inflation down. But, the reason it's important is that, the Fed has a constitutional agenda, which is basically, to provide a lender of last resort, if banks get in trouble, and to care about unemployment and the growth of the economy. Period. That's their thing. Has the Fed always been independent? Well, pretty much since 1913 when it first got constructed. But there have been times when not. And one of the biggest times that you'll remember and I remember um, is Richard Nixon, who influenced Arthur Burns to keep interest rates very low so he could win an election. Arthur Burns and the Fed wanted to raise interest rates. He said, "Hey, hang off. You know, I don't know what your mortgage was back in the 1970s. My dad was paying 15% mortgage.
Yeah.
It took Paul Volcker to come in and say, we screwed up. That was all because of, Fed not being independent. So it's really important that the Fed is independent. And by the way, he can't fire Jerome Powell. You can't. He has no authority to fire,
He keeps
fire.
doing things that he can't do, though.
I
That's
know.
what concerns me.
That's true. That's true.
Um, all right. And then just finally, just to pivot back to the economic forecast and the local information. I'm just uh, curious. You had a piece in Newshawk not too long ago about rent-evictions and this legislation that the city council just passed here in the People's Republic of Santa Barbara. What, I mean, the housing thing, it's just like issues one, two, and three, but uh, I just worry about unintended consequences about so
Yeah.
much of the legislation that's happening in Sacramento, it's happening here. Say a word about that if you would.
Yeah. I have to say, Jerry, one of the things I tell, our policymakers is I never want to hear the words unintended consequences coming out of your mouth. It means you didn't really understand and dig deep enough into what the issue is. Otherwise, you would have understood the consequences. And if I could do anything, I would get rid of the word economics, by the way. It has a very bad connotation for most people. I would turn it into something like, the study of incentives or the science of incentives. So if you just think about that for a second, if all of a sudden you're gonna tell landlords, that you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't raise rents, you can't renovate when you want to renovate. What is their incentive? What is the incentive of a builder who might want to build some apartments? The incentives are, I'm not going to do it. And by the way, we've seen what happens in Chicago and New York and the South Bronx when we have stopped people from renovating and putting money into their apartments. So, what we're really doing is we're pretty much stopping new construction, which would have helped in the affordability side of things. And, we're basically hamstringing a group of people it's not their fault that rents are high in Santa Barbara,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah,
and so
exactly.
if we as a community, and I believe this, you know, we do need to have our nurses and firefighters and, waiters and waitresses, live in Santa Barbara. I want that. And, if that's really true, it's a community problem, not a landlord problem. So all of a sudden we're attacking one group of people, landlords, making them suffer, to solve a community problem. So that's a big issue I have that we need to figure out a community solution that's just not hitting landlords.
And what's your take kind of on the overall way that Sacramento has approached the problem? I'm always complaining about the lack of or the disappearance of local control, and and I get that it's like I mean, a building problem, but it doesn't seem to be working.
No, it's not working, and that's what Leo Haney will talk about, on May 12th. But you know, unfortunately, there's not one solution for every place. I mean, Santa Barbara, while it's not unique in the world, it is different than, Yolo County. It is different than these other counties. And, you know, it- do I think a state should come and say that city or county should build, we need 4,000 more units? Who are they to know how many more units we should really have? And, there's only a couple ways out of this, right? For affordability. And, I think kind of we should get rid of this term affordable. Santa Barbara is never going to be affordable.
Mhm.
It's just not. I mean, Paris is not
Never has
affordable.
been.
Never has been. London is not affordable. Manhattan is not affordable, even though they have 50-story buildings. They're as dense as it can possibly be. It's not affordable. What we can do is try to figure out ways to help those individuals who are having a harder time, living. And, that's why something like a voucher system, or negative in something like that, is going to be the only way to sort of out of this. If builders can't get the market price, they're not going to build. And and do I want to rely on our county or our state to build our houses for us? We're really bad at public housing in the US. Never been very good at it.
Yeah. Rob Fredericks does a good job, but it's
Yeah, he's great. No, Rob's great. I mean, they're great at what they do.
overall, I take your point. All right.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, Peter Rupert, I have so many questions I could ask you. I just sit here all day asking you about this stuff, but I do appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today. And we will look forward to the economic forecast, the new numbers, the new analysis coming out next month.
Great.
And thank you so much for speaking with us on Newsmakers.
Appreciate it, Jerry. And let's keep those Giants rolling.
All right, bud.
All right. Take care.
Take care.